Hey,
There we go.
how are you, Jeannette?
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
good.
Give me just
Good.
one minute.
Excellent. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I've got a puppy who's sort of on my lap and may, be disruptive. So.
Oh, I love disruptive puppies. There's no better kind than disruptive. Yeah, I've got teenagers and two rescue cats that are misbehaving. They like to knock
Nice.
everything over. They're in that stage where they're like, oh, it's on a shelf. Poof, must knock over. Yeah. Oh well, that's my life. And then my teenagers, it's like
Knock everything over.
yeah, I keep telling people I'm going through quarantine. Like it's pretty terrible, but it's true. Oh. How is everybody in class? Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hey guys.
All right, we're just gonna wait for everyone to kind of come in, and
Okay.
and then I'll do the official introduction, and everyone has lots of questions.
Good. Okay.
Now that Zoom has gone to you have to have the password because people like pornographers were Zoom. Yeah. I never, unfortunately, that was never something that I got to experience, but
I kept hoping. I told
I
everybody in
know,
book club it
I
would just brighten things up,
I know, right?
There's more to talk about.
Nothing. Everybody's wearing their clothes. It's very boring.
Yeah. Oh well.
Oh well. All right. So, hi everyone. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. This is Jeannette Cooperman, and she has quite the amazing writing career. She began as a staff writer for the Riverfront Times. If you don't know that, it's sort of an independently run newspaper. It's pretty well known in the St. Louis area for doing stories that maybe the St. Louis Post-Dispatch wouldn't consider covering. They really one of my favorite reads. And then Jeannette Cooperman moved to St. Louis Magazine and worked there for 14 years. Was it, Jeannette?
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
14 years.
No,
And
I think it was almost 15.
Wow. Wow. And then now you've moved on to The Common Reader, which is kind of like more personal essays. Although you say that line between personal essay and investigative narrative journalism is a real fine
I still
line.
like the reporting.
Yeah. Yes. And so I've got personally so many questions for you, but I will try to make sure that the students here get their fair share. Here's my personal story with Jeannette, and you will hear this from so many different readers and writers and people that she's profiled, is that she's this amazing listener. And I have to admit, it's true in my experience. I met her at a dinner party, what was it, like 3 years ago? And she made me feel like I was funny and intelligent.
You were.
And you listen, I mean, just the way that you're able to listen. And I think I've told all of you that the two criteria, in my opinion, for being a really great narrative journalist is curiosity and compassion. And I have to admit, Jeannette, you have that in spades, that you're curious, but you're also compassionate. There are no sort of, it doesn't seem like you've covered anyone that you haven't been able to kind of find the humanity, except maybe Eric Greitens. Maybe that was
I was just going to say, Eric Greitens would be the only one. And that includes pedophiles, murderers, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of scary that our former governor.
It is scary.
The people that you were searching for the humanity and it was hard to find. All right, so I'm going to open this up to anybody out there who wants to ask a question. But if you want to add your name to the chat, do you all see the chat on the right-hand side? The Zoom group chat?
No.
On the bottom, if you just scroll down to the bottom, things will pop up like chat and share screen and that kind of thing. Do you see that? Yes, everybody? Okay, Will sees it.
Okay, I just clicked on chat, but oh, there it is. Okay, good.
And I just wrote a little message. If we can't hear you, probably means you have the mute button on, or look down the left-hand corner and join the conversation using computer.
Got it.
Perfect. So if we tend to, sort of trip over each other, then that might be a really great way of kind of managing the conversation. If you want to go next, if you ever, or you can raise your hand, that's whatever you want to do. Who has a question for Jeannette that would like to start?
Like a game show. I wait for the little yellow line to pop.
I've got one.
Good.
Okay, so normally what would you say you do first? Doing a lot of research into somebody or interviewing first?
What I do is first I do all the background research. So I will read and read and read. And I mean, even peripherally, like if somebody is expert in something, I will go try and read about that subject. I will read all sorts of stuff. I will read any other media that's been done about them. Then what I usually do for an in-depth profile is I kind of circle in. I will start with the outer circle of people that might know this person, but not well enough that they're going to go call the person and say a reporter is trying to find out about you. And I'll try and get a feel for them that way. And then I will let them know that I want to do this profile, and I'll ask them for people that they would approve me talking to, which is usually a different list. Mm-hmm. And often I will talk to them first because it gives me much better questions. And then I will talk to that person, and then I will go talk to people that I feel like might know something pretty provocative, but maybe had I done that first, they would have quickly called my subject and said, there's this reporter and she asked this, and it might have made the person nervous. This all sounds a little more adversarial than I usually am, but it's more a matter of just not making people feel like they're being scrutinized in a way that's hostile. So you have to kind of win their trust before you go to the people closest to them.
I think a lot of my students are kind of dealing with that right now. I think I told you a little bit.
Yeah, I love that assignment.
Yeah. And we started with mostly memoir and really delving into the sort of creative part of creative nonfiction. And, after we kind of like investigated ourselves quite a bit, I've wanted to try to push them to see themselves sort of in light of a larger context. And for a lot of them, that means maybe as a part of a larger family narrative, a larger family conversation.
Yes.
For me personally, it's, I think always delving into like a family secret or somebody that you wanted to know more about, maybe a relationship that you've let kind of flounder a little bit, maybe to reinvestigate.
Or feuds that you never knew why people were angry or.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of my students have kind of gotten into, I can read it in some of their pieces that they're trying to interview a grandparent who's always been sort of secretive or really kind of, and so that's really, really great advice. What advice, how else can you get somebody who maybe is really resistant to
there's a couple of things I've learned. One of the people that I interviewed had been about 12 and had been at Auschwitz. He had survived it. He had never gotten therapy for it. He was now a physician at WashU. He was very sort of closed. And I started asking him all sorts of things. And because he said he had talked to his, I think his grandson's kindergarten class about it. That was the extent to which he had talked about this to anybody. Wow. And so I started asking him about, the weird questions like, well, what did you hear when the Nazis first came, the stormtroopers first came to your town, and what did it look like, and what were their uniforms like? And at first I could just feel the resistance come up, and he just didn't want to talk to me at all. And so what I usually do is I really explain what narrative journalism is, and I explain it as though, imagine if you were making a movie about this. What details somebody would need to really feel like they were there. And I want you to tell me what it was like when you were 12, not now. Go back in time. Talk to me like you're 12 again. And he was bright. And I think once I shifted it a little bit to a movie, he could kind of get into it and collaborate. Yeah. I think it gave it enough distance that it was like a collaboration. And then oh my God, the details he came up with. You know, the blue and green ostrich plumes and the hats and the black leather and the watery bone gruel that they ate and the bodies that were stacked up against the thing. I mean, there were so many details that I couldn't get until I enlisted him and explained why I was asking these probing questions. And then he got it. So sometimes you just have to kind of explain yourself and make it more of a partnership than you just asking questions.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Mac actually is investigating his great grandmother, and she was in the Nazi camps as well. Yeah. So when he told me like, well, I've got this, I'm like, oh my God, do this now.
Yeah, great story.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, where's Mac? Who am I?
That's
okay.
Yeah. He asked the first question. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Anybody else have?
There you are. Okay.
Yeah. I'm Mac. Hi.
I saw Montgomery Mac down at the bottom, and I got really confused.
My great grandmother was in Auschwitz, and I can't come up with what it's called, but the camp that's in Schindler's List is where my great grandfather was in.
At DACA, maybe. Oh wow. Yeah. So how did it go? How did the questioning
Well, I mean,
go?
they're both dead, so I had to talk to
okay.
My aunt, my great aunt, and my grandfather, since my grandmother has dementia, and it's a very touchy topic for her, even when she didn't have dementia.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I kind of had to dig back, and my great grandmother was she worked at the Holocaust Museum, so there's a lot of stories and things that she's, you know, it's all documented there that I haven't delved into that yet, but I was,
you know, if you take pictures of stuff on your phone, even if it's there, or if you have stuff at home, sometimes physical objects can trigger a memory. Like if you show it to another relative and you say, did she ever talk about this? Look what I found. You know, sometimes it helps, like to go through somebody's family album, or to have, you know, anything like that, that's like a physical artifact that you can, a little bit of show and tell, you know. People think that way. Sometimes it's a trigger.
Yes.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, my great grandfather was the one that I was really curious about, because I know hardly anything. Well, I knew hardly anything about him, but I talked to my great aunt and I learned a lot, and that was it was really, really cool to learn as much as I did. I'm excited to write about that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited too.
Well, forward the papers.
I know, I've got, you know, like a Comp 2 class. I'm not so excited about those essays, but I'm excited for these ones. And I have to admit, not that I hope nobody's head gets too big, but the writers in this class, they are pretty amazing. These students are already producing such great work. I think we have a question from Chris. Chris, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hello. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to first off by saying I really enjoyed your piece, the life lessons from beloved and respected St. Louisans. So
was that the wisdom one? Yeah.
Yes. And I was curious of those people that you interviewed, and they were all very extraordinary. Which one of those do you feel left the biggest impact on you after the interviews?
Man, that is such a good question. Because there were so many. I mean, I just saved all my notes. You know, I saved all the rough notes because they said a ton more than I could even fit digitally. I don't think it was a particular person. I think it was that sum total of just relax, you know, that all the stuff you think is a big deal isn't. And, you know, to kind of let go and live your life fully. And, you know, there was a certain ease to these people, you know, when they had reached this point. And that helped me. You know, I'm trying to get there, but I think it was that cumulative feeling.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Oh, here's some.
Yeah. How about anybody else?
I just saw a new one. That's a good one. When do you know a piece is done?
Amanda.
Where's Amanda?
Hi,
there you
Amanda.
are.
Hi. Can you hear me?
To find you on my screen. Yeah, you know, I don't write fiction. I tried a murder mystery and I was terrible at it because I can't plot to save my life. It gets way too convoluted. My husband just rolls his eyes. He's like, babe, simplify. So all I can answer is for journalism, and I don't know that it's going to help at all with fiction, because that's a much more artful kind of ending. For me, the trick was always knowing when to stop researching, and I finally realized that when I was sick of it and I started seeing the same stuff crop up again, I could stop, because I tend to overdo it. But for fiction, you have to ask Melissa.
Oh no, I don't write fiction.
Okay, well.
We have the same problem, Amanda. It's sort of like, but it's kind of a similar problem with non-fiction memoir writing. I think for me, it's always, I walk in not quite knowing exactly where it's going to start and where it's going to end, but I have some sort of idea of some narrative arc. And so Amanda, for me, it always feels like when that essential question that I began with, it's not that it's answered, sometimes it just generates more questions. When I feel like there's a sense of, okay, now I have a picture that I can paint for people, and that the picture itself to some degree is enough of a story, is enough of a picture. And like you're talking about with film, Jeannette, I think that's a great kind of metaphor to use.
Yeah, if this were a movie and it ended here, how would it feel? Would it be abrupt? Would there be some closure? Yeah, one thing I've noticed with nonfiction, again, back to my thing, is that I'll often make notes in the margin when I'm taking notes about possible end, possible opener, because there are oftentimes you come across things like a quote that's just, wow, a clincher kind of quote. And that helped me because I didn't used to do that. And then I would, forget which one that I thought was so great. But that kind of helps if you're gathering and you see something that's going to be a great ending, mark it somehow.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
Here's one. Mac SC. Okay, hi, there you are. Do I ever find it difficult to make dialogue seem genuine? Actually, I think I'm pretty good at that. First of all, I take notes verbatim, and I'm, again, not doing fiction, I'm doing real life. But people can still be stilted. And, so you just almost have to tell them sometimes, you got to loosen up. I mean, I have said to people, it sounds like you're nervous. It sounds like, and I will tease them out of it, and I will make them laugh, and I will paraphrase it until they start to get the idea. But contractions help, like not having somebody be so formal. There was one time I even said, can I loosen this up a little bit? And got their permission, because there's nothing worse than stilted dialogue. But I have found that if you take it verbatim, either tape it or I use shorthand, and then, which is a dead art, I know. But then if you go back and you're snipping and cutting and taking bits and pieces and weaving them together, you can get it a little more natural than it even sounded when they spoke it, if somebody's really verbose. You take snippets, and then that helps, makes it a little breezier.
Yeah.
But I think that's really important. I think it's hugely important. I can't believe how often I will hear or read something that sounds wooden. And I don't know why. Yes. We're all supposed to be loose and conversational now. I don't know why that still happens. But it's usually when people are very self-conscious and very formal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also if somebody feels like you have an agenda, right? That you walk in already wanting to pigeonhole them as this or that. Yes. That defensiveness is really difficult to get over. So sometimes, again, what I've told them is about like kind of circling, like you're talking about, like instead of jumping to the question that is burning in your mind, right? Get there a little bit, like circle around it a little bit, get them kind of, throw them some softballs at the beginning, something that's really kind of easy. And I know, Abby, your piece that you've written about your grandmother, that was really helpful. What was your childhood like? I'm not going to ask you that, the question that I really want to ask you, because you can feel that your grandmother was kind of sort of defensive. But if you really do approach people like, I am here just to listen. Like, I don't have an agenda necessarily. I just want to know your story. That helps. And sometimes I've told that, like, to my own aunts and uncles, like, I just want to know your story. I want to know who you are. I want to get to know you better.
Because so often people feel like their story is not newsworthy. You know, they're used to things having to be over dramatic and over sensational to even count. And they're like, oh, you don't want to know that. So if you start to really say, and what color was it? And they'll talk and say, oh, and what did you feel like? And what was the weather like? And by the time you ask a lot of that, they start to enjoy talking. And then they realize you really do want to know. You know?
Yeah.
Now, one caveat to the softball beginning is if somebody is either a celebrity or a major expert or somebody who's used to adversarial stuff, like a tough lawyer or a finance type who's under the gun, I don't do that. I start really hard because they're so used to reporters and they're used to the same old questions. They're bored with it. They have pat answers. They usually think you're dumb. And they're usually wanting to get this over as quickly as possible. And if you throw them something really hard and tough and smart that shows you know what they're about, they sit up straight and they start paying attention and it changes things. So I have learned to do that when it's somebody who is sick of the same old stuff or doesn't respect reporters.
That's really, really, really interesting. Yeah, that's really great.
We don't always have a good reputation.
I disagree. Okay, so Brendan, it looks like you have a question. Would you like to ask it?
She kind of went over that. I was just asking, like how the actual interview process usually is for you, and like you kind of touched on the second part a bit about keeping them casual.
Mm-hmm. But tell me what else you want, like in terms of the actual process. Do you mean like how you prepare or what you do, or
how once you've sat down and done the interview, how do you actually go about and asking the questions and furthering the
once I'm there
conversation?
in that moment?
Yes.
Yeah, and it really depends on personality. What I try and do is get a sense of somebody's comfort zone and their personality. If they are very, the terms left brain and right brain are just silly now. I know they're not accurate, but if they're very steeped in facts, then I'll start with facts. If they're poetic or artistic, then I will not start with facts because that will bore them to tears. If they're anxious and sort of not used to media, as we said, I'll start with really simple, basic stuff that they can answer and feel fine and build up their confidence. But I try and get a sense of how there's even things like if somebody's really warm and emotional, you want to say, how do you feel about it? Not how do you think about it? If they're very cerebral, you want to use words like think. Your language makes the difference, in how much people want to answer that question. The other thing I do is I will write out questions ahead of time, and I mean really script them, write them out completely so that they are interesting and they're tight and they're well written. And then I will set it aside. I don't even look at it during the interview. We just talk. And then when the interview is nearing the end, I say, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I pull out my list and I go through then and I pick up anything that didn't actually come up. But if you stick to a list and you ask number 1, number 2, number 3 in that order, you will miss all the tangents that are really interesting because that's the stuff you don't know and you didn't even know to ask. So somebody answers and they start talking about something else, you need to go with them and follow their train of events and their stream of consciousness, and you have no idea where you'll go, and that's actually the fun of it. I've seen too many reporters get an answer where they're starting to digress and go into something interesting, and the reporter says, and they go back to their list of questions, and it's like you just lost a major opportunity. But I do need to script it ahead of time because I'm shy and I'm not good on my feet, and so I need to have that for my comfort zone.
I think Xavier asks a question.
Yeah, there's more over here. I wasn't keeping up.
Xavier, so he's like our thinker. He's our philosopher. He says, do you consider yourself a humanist? Do you believe it plays a role to nonfiction writing? Xavier, do you want to explain what you mean by humanist?
Yeah, tell me what you mean by humanist, because I want to say yes, but I'm not sure if we have the same definition of it.
Basically, I guess, old Greek styled where it's like one for all, the I, the us, and the other. So it's like people like caring about, I guess, more all of humans in a way, and caring about the effects How everybody calls on everybody.
Yeah. I look for the universals. I look for the things that if you get really specific about one life, one person, that's usually going to be a universal underneath. Like the more specific you are, the more universal it is. And it's a weird paradox, but you don't want to just stay vague, like, you know, all humans love this and this person is interested in being kind. Say they saved their niece by giving her their blood marrow. When it's on the niece and the blood marrow, you have gone universal because anybody can connect that. And you know, we are all in this together. I do not really believe in adversarial journalism unless somebody has done something truly unjust and needs to be exposed.
Would you say that that's like the absolute best tactic to, I guess, make that connection with the us factor, or like with the everybody factor? Like, what do you think is the best way to connect with that? Because anybody can write and always feel it for themselves, but it's the best writers that can make it like connect with everybody.
Yeah,
so what do you
I think honesty is a big part of it. Like, and I don't mean just that your subject is honest. I mean that you're being rigorously honest with yourself as you write, and you're being as open and as honest and as faithful to the truth as you can be. And I think emotion, pulling the emotion from the material and using your own emotion, not in a way to get excessively sentimental or manipulative, but, you know, in fact, it's much stronger usually if you leave it pretty spare. But emotion to me and the specifics of people's experience and real candor about that is what pulls people together. You know, it's the kind of stuff that stops you when you're in the grocery store and all of a sudden a stranger opens up and, you know, you start hearing about their life. There are certain things that will pull you and have you stay there even though your frozen food is melting. And it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think we have one from Will. Do you have any general rules of thumb for what dialogue you choose to include as direct quotes from interviews?
Oh, anything, you know, it sounds like such a cop-out, but you know it when you see it. Whenever somebody says something that is funny, that is tight, that is jazzy, that does not sound like the same old thing you would expect, anything that kind of makes you wake up, anything that has some life to it, anything that feels honest, as I just said, where they're really bearing their heart. If you can't paraphrase it and do it the same justice, then it needs to be a direct quote. And that's exactly how I feel about profanity. If you can't use a substitute or a hyphen or a pseudonym and have it carry the same weight, then you need to have the profanity in there. Not that you asked, but that's just, it's my same test for that.
Amanda needs to, yeah, Amanda's listening.
There you are, thank you.
Yeah, what I love so much about what you're saying, and is so true for all these writers, is that I think, you know, and Amanda, you were asking, like, when do you know when this is done? For this particular piece, it's kind of when you get to some sort of truth that helps you understand. Like when you reach that point, then you're like, okay, now I can kind of, and again, it can sometimes be multiple truths, you know, because that's what happens when you start to piece together even the life, like Mac, of your great-grandmother. There are going to be multiple perspectives and multiple truths going on here. But sometimes it's kind of when you feel like you've got enough pieces of the puzzle to kind of have some kind of image.
Well, and usually you've raised something at the very beginning, as Melissa said before, and if you've circled back to it, if there's a sense of completion, because whatever tension you had in the beginning has somehow been resolved or addressed, that usually means you're done.
Yeah, I definitely achieved that.
Good.
I missed that.
I said I definitely achieved that. Yeah.
Good.
Amanda, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it out loud?
No, I can ask it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. What's your advice for more difficult interviews? And then, if you're comfortable, what's the most difficult interview that you've conducted in your career?
Oh, there have been so many that were difficult. I'll start there. Some of the most difficult ones were usually in terms of access. For example, there was a Vietnamese gang that was doing home invasions, and until I found a friend of a friend of a family member, I just could not get in. Same thing with doing a story about the Roma gypsies.
Oh, okay.
You know, secretive groups are really tough to break into. But in terms of actual interviews, I think probably the toughest was a gentleman. He was a refugee from Afghanistan. He had been a journalist there, and he was an atheist. He was a journalist. He was tortured. Acid was thrown on him. His ear was cut off. He was clearly traumatized, and he did not speak English. So I had to have a translator. And because he was like even physically still not strong, we had to go very slowly. So I would go many, many times, and I would keep it really short. You know, we would talk for maybe 20 minutes. And then I would get to enjoy his wife's wonderful hospitality, because she always was bringing food, because it was a cultural thing. And luckily that was good, because the Vietnamese family's rotten fish sauce, I didn't do as well with that. You always have to eat whatever people offer you. You know, that's kind of part of it. And so the rest of it would be social, and I would leave and I would go back, and then we would do another 20 minutes. And what happened as we started to make some progress is the translating thing. I started to feel real tension, like things were falling apart. It wasn't going right. And I could feel it between the two of them. Turned out the translator was an evangelical Christian from Afghanistan who did not appreciate his atheism. And he was picking that up, and she was mad at him, and, you know, despite the situation. And I had to say, we need to change. We can't go on like this. So for every layer of reasons, that one was hellish. You know, just the trauma, the horrible stuff he had gone through, the timing, the fact that it was hard for him to talk about it, the fact that he did not speak English, and then the fact that we got a translator who was a different ideology completely. All that was tough. Oh, what was your first part? Let's see. Advice for more difficult interviews. You got to give me the kind of difficult you mean, because there's so many different kinds. Either people who don't want to talk, or people who don't, you know, there's a million ways it's difficult.
Yeah, I guess it would be for just people who don't want to talk, because like with my piece specifically, I'm doing, it's about my mother, and she's gone through 2 very traumatic incidents, and I just recently found out about them. And so I was going to I interviewed my dad, and he's very open and honest with me about everything.
Good.
But then my uncle, he's much more reserved. He's my mother's brother. And so he's kind of still sheltering my mother.
Sure.
And wanting to see her in a good light. So just kind of cracking my uncle down. Just what advice?
Well, first I'm going to say you're in a really extra tough position because you're a family member. This is so close that's making it exponentially harder. This would be way easier if these were strangers. So you've got that to deal with. The second thing is, sometimes if you quote someone who has been more open to the person who is less open, it frees them up a little bit. The other thing that's a little bit of a trick, but it's for a good purpose, is if you sort of draw the wrong conclusion and say it out loud. You know, like, I'm making this up because I don't know the situation, but so what you're saying is mom was really painfully shy. And then, no, she wasn't shy at all. She just went through hell. You know, if you actually throw at them the wrong conclusion, they will feel obliged to correct it, and you may start to get more information. The other thing I've done is just come out and say, I'm getting the sense you don't want to talk about this. And can you tell me why? Because sometimes people have reasons that aren't even, that are so easily addressed. You know, I've had people say, well, because I'm worried if my Aunt Bertha sees it and she'll know I mentioned her. I'm like, fine, we'll make Aunt Bertha a pseudonym, you know, so hours of tension are now resolved. People sometimes worry about things that you don't even know they're worried about. And if you can really clear the air and say, tell me why this is hard, you know, are you worried about mom's feelings? Because she wants this done. She told me, you know, you guys can talk about it. It's fine with her. Anything you can do to find out why the resistance, that can help too.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure. Andre, where's Andre? There, hi. Fiction writer myself. I'm thinking about getting into nonfiction, such as writing memoir, doing journalism.
Andrea. Hi, Andre.
Okay, getting started, find out everything you can find out. You know, because the more, I mean, again, I said my problem is I'm an over-researcher, but the more you research, patterns will start to emerge and a theme will start to emerge and you'll start to get a sense of what the story is. So the first thing with nonfiction is you just gather up and learn as much as you possibly can about your topic. And then you start to organize it, and then you start to find patterns in it, and then you start to think, oh, I want to write about this piece of it. And then you kind of go through whatever your system is to kind of tag all the bits that fit in that. I use Scrivener, which is a writing program software that is fantastic. I love it. That helps me a lot. But yeah, that's getting started. The writer's block, what I've always been able to do, because I've always had too much to do, is have 10 things going at once, because I find that if I'm stuck on one, I can just turn to the other, which works a lot better for me than just stopping cold. So like if it's a day when I just feel too shy, my friend Eddie and I at the RFT used to joke about this because we shared an office. It's like there are days when we couldn't even pick up the phone. You know, we just felt too introverted. And on days like that, I do all the research, you know, or I do the editing. I do the stuff that doesn't feel as scary. And then on days when I'm kind of feeling open and confident, I do all the phone interviews. I go out, I meet people, I do whatever. I try and match my mood, but I try and always have a million things to do so that I can pick one that matches my mood and still feel like I'm moving forward and not stuck. You know, because for me, most people like clean their desk or do housework, but I hate housework. And to me, that doesn't calm the anxiety. The anxiety is that I can't write. And so being able to dust does not do anything for that. You know?
No, that's why I listen to music, because like music, I feel like yes, Max preaching, but that's why music, I feel like I'm in the state of writing, I'm in a movie, and I realized over the years that I tend to get fascinated by different topics, and so I'm like, I want to research this. Oh wait, I want to research that. I need to write this down. I'm the same with stories. It's like out of the blue, I can come up with a story. And I do like mixing genres and stuff like that. So I'm just like, slow down.
You know what some people will do is find music, a song, a piece of music that really fits a particular story they're working on, and just, you know, have almost a playlist for that assignment, because it helps them really get in the right frame of mind to do that particular piece. You know, that's kind of a fun trick, you know,
right.
It's really powerful.
You're really like making a checklist of my writing style right now. It's really funny.
That's good.
Yes. We have the same brain.
The funny thing is, everyone, is that Jeannette has talked about before, you've talked about how you're really an introvert. And that,
total. Yeah,
that in college
shy.
You were very quiet and the shy student, you didn't. And now you're somebody who goes out and, you know, conducts interviews with, you know, really well-known people, sometimes celebrities, you know, sometimes really dangerous criminals.
They don't scare me. The celebrities and the dangerous people don't scare me. But, you know, Adam Gopnik has this great quote, girls with notebooks are dangerous. There is nothing that makes you feel more confident than being the one who's asking the questions. And it really has helped. I mean, I genuinely am not so shy anymore. I'm still an introvert. I still like to stay home and read, and sheltering at home, it's not hard for me. But it really does make you a lot more open to the world, and, you know, it has helped. One thing that gave me a lot of encouragement was Adrienne LeBlanc, who's an amazing writer, nonfiction, talked about how she was so shy that when she was covering the courts, she would stay outside the trial and talk to like the guy who was sweeping and the clerks and stuff. And then it turned out that she got some great material, and then that helped her have the courage to go into the trial. And, you know, so not alone. There's a lot of people that do it. The other thing that I think helps is if you're not incredibly aggressive and over the top and all caught up in your own energy, it puts people at ease. You know, it's sort of a weird kind of I don't know how to explain it because you guys are too young for Columbo, and he was a detective who would be disarming to people because he would fumble around and sound like an idiot. And it's kind of that approach. You know, if you're a little bit shy and you're honest about it, I think that makes it easier for people to relax. It's not that I cultivated it on purpose. It's a bonus.
Just so you know, my mom and I used to watch Columbo all the time. So
all right,
I know what it is.
I saw you smile. I thought, okay, I got one.
Yeah.
I recognize the name. I can't say that I remember.
Yes. Like we
Well,
used to watch all the
it's a
old
technique.
shows. I Love Lucy, Cara Burnett, you name it. So
nice.
You have an old soul, Andre. You have an
yes.
Lydia, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Almost.
What is your advice for when you get stuck kind of in the middle of the story and you know where you want it to go, but you can't figure out how to weave all of the research and the information together in the way to tell the story the way you want to tell it?
Yeah, that's hard. That's really hard. I'm kind of there now with something that I'm working on. There is a little quirky thing that if it's not that long a piece, an old editor of mine used to do, and I found it amusing, and then I tried it once and it actually worked. He would just retype the thing. He would start over and retype what he had and just keep typing on through, and then sometimes he would just type himself right past the stuck place. That depends on the kind of story it is. If you feel like it's just not logically structured, then you can go look at what you've got and kind of out to the side tag what the little topics are, like what you've written, and then see if maybe you can shuffle them around and they make more sense in a different order. I've actually cut stuff up and gotten down on the floor and moved it around just to see if there was a better order, which is kind of a fun game. If nothing else, you feel like you're 5 again. But or, you know, like go for a walk and just think about the story without having the story in front of you. And think about where you want it to go from there, and you know, try and the other thing to do is, and it helps if you have like a dog or a cat to do this too, or a very willing partner, but if you can read it out loud, a lot of times you can hear where you've gone wrong the minute you start to read out loud, and you sort of stop yourself and say, oh wait, no, I need to fix that as you're speaking. So those are all little tricks. I guess the common denominator of the tricks is you need to get some distance from it. And you need to find a way to look at it a little more structurally, probably.
The poet Billy Collins says that the best listener is a goldfish. So
yes, if you have a goldfish, I love that. That's a good line.
Read something out loud, and then usually you can. Yeah, you're right. If you read it, because that forces you to be in an observer position, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes that really, for me, in my own writing. Sure.
Reading it, retyping it. The other weird thing is put it into a completely wildly different font and print it out where it looks different, you know, because I always see things when something is in, like if it's in layout stage, or if it's, you know, you see things that you didn't see. I love writing online because I can go back in and fix it, you know. It's that with each iteration of a piece, you see things differently. Another thing is to try handwriting. You know, if you're stuck in the middle, try writing by hand instead of being at the keyboard, because that's a different connection with your brain, and it's a little bit more emotional and subjective. The hand to the brain thing they have shown kind of opens up different parts of the way you think, and that can help too.
Sometimes just physically changing your position wherever you're writing. So if you typically type at the dining room table, getting up, taking a pad of paper out to the park or out.
Going outside.
Right there. And sometimes just physically being in a different place will put you in a different place mentally. That's helpful to me. And sometimes I'm like,
absolutely.
There's something about this space right here that's not letting me create.
I've done my best writing like on trains or sitting stuck in doctor's offices. Places you're stuck are great.
Yeah. Amen. And I think we've got another one from Xavier. Do you want to, hi, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. How could someone better communicate or have better communication conversations with people that have like opposing definition or values? And how could they communicate with those who lack the ability to understand their own situation? Because you had said at the beginning that you want to be like clear with the way, I guess, that you ask your questions, specific words. I've always that kind of person where specific words have always just meant specific things. And I always like them in specific ways when I talk. So how would you like get used to communicating with people that don't even know what their own definitions are? Sometimes.
Right. That's you just went right to the core, especially these days. I mean, first of all, if you're talking to people who have very different values than you do, the main thing is to set yours aside. And I mean it, even if you're talking to somebody who does things you think are criminally unjust, set it aside. You're not the point here. This is not about you. Be neutral, set that aside, and just tell them, I want to understand. You've got to make me understand this. And, you can be honest. You can say, this isn't where I come from. I have not understood, all that's led up to this. I don't know your religion or your politics very well at all, but you've got to do it in a gentle, neutral way where they know that you're not about to attack. And you've got to just beg them to make you understand. And then again, use those little questions to show that you really mean it. You really want to understand. So then they say something and you just bite back any reaction you have and you say, okay, but what about this? Or tell me about this. Or, it's more working on yourself, honestly. And if you can set all that aside and go in as neutrally as possible, just wanting to understand, you can often get there. It doesn't mean you will agree, and it doesn't mean you're selling your soul, but it means that you will be able to present it fairly. And that is the point, I think. And your reader will draw their own conclusions. So we're not here to preach. Now, with people who lack the ability to understand their own situation, tell me more what you mean by that, because I don't know. I mean, there have been people who have had cognitive disabilities where I had to make sure for ethical reasons that they even knew they were talking to a reporter, but I'm not sure that's what you mean.
I guess in the situation, it's almost like connecting to the idea of like values in the way that how would you communicate with someone that doesn't even believe like climate change is even possible? Like, yeah, I can understand if someone doesn't believe in it, but how would you communicate with someone that doesn't even think it's possible? Like, it's just it's kind of those things.
What you're trying to do is sort of fairly represent what they think. So you don't have to persuade them of anything. You just have to find out how they think the world is the way it is, and what they think of the people who talk about climate change, and what, it's all on them. It's what you're finding out is how they see the world, what they think about it when people talk about climate change, how that makes them feel, what they think is wrong about that, how they think why they think the temperature is going up. You just are inquisitive.
I also have one more. How do you, I guess, approach people or find out things without asking questions? Because a lot of people seem to take like questions almost as like an attack now.
Yes, we're in a weird time. The questions have to be incredibly neutral and gentle, but if even that is a problem, sometimes a good way for a reporter is to just go and be in a situation and report on people talking to each other. In other words, let's say nobody in a particular, white supremacist motorcycle gang wants to talk to me. But let's say I ask and they're willing to have me come to the bar where they hang out. So I just go with my notepad and I try and be as unobtrusive as possible. And I get down, or I tape if they have permission for it, what they say to each other. And you can learn more that way. A lot of times. I remember once I had to do a story. This was gentler than what you're talking about, but it was a story about a veterinarian, and he was in the Big Brother program, and he had this adorable 10-year-old kid that they had become friends because he was doing this. And the veterinarian was this gay white guy, and the kid, you know, like they were really across different worlds, and they had this great friendship. They were both really shy, and they had no idea what to tell me. And so I said, I don't want you to talk to me. I just want you to talk to each other, you know, and I threw a few questions at him, and then I just let them go. And I bought him a milkshake and sat there, and they talked to each other, and they started teasing each other, and they started talking about when they first met and what they thought of each other when they first met and how that changed. And pretty soon I had way more than I would have gotten if I had been asking the questions. So sometimes people talking to each other or just observing in a situation can give you more. You know, there's a million ways to get it.
Oh, well, that's really good advice, actually. Observation,
Yeah.
like direct contact.
Yeah, it doesn't all have to be direct at all.
Some of my favorite
Watching people.
Yeah, of Jeannette's. I mean, I don't know about you all, but some of my favorite pieces were, you know, when the interview hadn't even started yet. It was just observing, say, two documentary filmmakers in a restaurant and not wanting, you know, to interrupt their waitress, or, you know, people at, you know, a farm that rescued those, you know, escaped cows, and the smells of that spring day. I mean, that kind of, I mean, just observing people in their quote unquote natural element is another way of really kind of creating these people as characters. And we've been talking about that a lot in class. How do you make your grandparent a character? How do you make your mom a character? And sometimes it's those little observations in their quote unquote natural element. So that when you get to the interview where they kind of maybe start to tighten up a little bit, we already get a sense of their personality. So it's not, the interview part isn't the first time that we're introduced to their personality. I think that's...
Well, because an interview is so contrived. If I read one more celeb interview that starts out with what that person had for lunch at the restaurant where they interviewed them, it's like, please, you know, go talk to them on the set. Go talk to them when they're doing dishes at home. Go talk to them and be able to observe them doing something, because action does speak louder sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. I want to throw this to Abby or Kat or Mary, if the three of you have any questions that you would like to ask.
I do. So whenever you are writing and you're kind of in that middle stage, and you kind of find yourself maybe stuck, or you're just not sure where it's headed, do you let other people read it and kind of help you, or do you keep it to yourself?
It depends on the kind of story it is. If it's a story where I feel like I'm just in my own muddle and I need to sort it through, and if an editor tries to fix it for me, I'm not going to like what they do, and I won't know what I was trying to do, then I keep it to myself. If it is, like, for example, if it's about history, my husband's an historian, he's great at this stuff. He's also very logical, and so I will talk it out to him over dinner just to say, I'm stuck, here's what, and he will turn around and say, well, here's your story, you know, and it's based on what I have said, but his ability to go to the heart of it. And a lot of times I'm just too close at that moment. Again, we go back to the distance thing. So it has to be somebody I trust, and it has to be a certain kind of story. Otherwise, I just tough it out, because usually my muddle is my own. Either I've got too much ego in it and I so want it to be good that it's not going to be, and I have to just be able to throw that away, or I've got too much emotion connected to it, like watching a bunch of puppies get euthanized and having to write about it, and I just need to kind of go cry a little bit and then come back and write it. You know, there's a lot of different ways you get stuck, but sometimes somebody will help and sometimes they will really do damage. You know, it's just too emotional or too fragile or too much in your own head at that moment. And I think you can gauge it by how you feel. If you say to yourself, God, I wish somebody would just like tell me what I've done here so I can figure out where to go next, then ask. Find somebody who's good and smart that you trust and ask them. But if you're a little bit like, oh, I don't know, it's not ready for that, then don't.
Sometimes I pitch things to my husband because I know I will do the opposite of what he suggests.
There you go. And that can be really helpful.
But it works, you know, like I'll talk to him and he'll be like, well, have you thought about this? And I'm like, no, but just talking to you makes me realize that's not the direction I want to go.
Exactly.
So
it is so clarifying. I've done that with friends too. Yeah, it's like, oh, right, okay, now I know. And it's exactly the opposite of what you just said.
Yeah, so sometimes you can go to a person not to know what to do, but what not to do. That works too sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Good point.
I think Kat has a question. Kat, did you want to ask that, or maybe I'll read it out loud? I think I'll read it out loud. Okay, so Kat asks, what resources do you use to research for pieces that might revolve around stories that happened in the past? And so many of our stories right now, I want them to try to, if possible, and the coronavirus has really thrown off everything in this class, but that's okay, to possibly do some outside research to kind of try to make this particular story have a larger social message or a larger social connection.
Sure.
I've told them, you know, like newspapers, archives, that kind of thing, but you have so much more practice in this than I do. So Kat, really great question.
Well, it's what you said. I mean, the first thing I do is go to the old newspaper indexes. You know, I love going through old newspaper stuff. You know, the New York Times is great. And it's amazing. We forget that St. Louis was the fourth city. And so there's a ton of stuff that happened in St. Louis, sort of in that Gilded Age time, that got reported in the New York Times. You know, stuff about the Muni Theater, stuff about, so it's amazing what I have found in the New York Times index. Theirs is great. And the old newspaper indices at the library are helpful. Museums, history museums are really helpful. And don't forget to go to the regional local ones. There are always some really obsessively dedicated people in little areas like the Webster Groves Historical Society or the St. Charles Historical Society. And they know so much, you know, or if you can find somebody, if it's connected to some sort of avocation or hobby, and there's some group that, you know, knows the whole history of that. Religious archives, there are nuns, you know, if it's something about healthcare or education, those nuns kept their records, unlike anybody did. So there's a lot of different, there's a St. Louis area archivist group, and you can find out where all the different archives are. That's really helpful. If it's something really nitty gritty, like the CIA puts a lot of their confidential classified information that has now been cleared, you can get that, and FBI, you can get it pretty easily now online. So that's, there was a guy in St. Louis who was, he defected during World War II to the Nazis. And so I got a bunch of stuff from the FBI, you know, just with a simple email request. And it's a lot of the original documents and stuff, which is kind of fun.
And sometimes,
but, yeah,
you know,
yeah,
go ahead. I'm so sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
I was pretty much done. I mean, you know, anything that deals with the past that you can figure out. But
yeah. And even if you can't find information about your specific relative. So for example, by the time I got around to talking about or researching my grandmother's schizophrenia, her medical records were long lost. You know, this was 1959. They don't keep them.
Yeah.
But I was able to, through an archivist actually, and also the nuns through St. Mary's, that's where she was, to get photos of what the psychiatric ward looked like, to get notes from doctors. So the stuff I was able to find wasn't specifically about my grandmother, but it was that time period. And then you can kind of, you know, layer that into your narrative structure. So, you know, keep that in mind. If you can't find specific information about your specific relative, sometimes this general information around that time period or similar events, that can be really useful.
There's even a ways to go back for weather, which sounds like silly, except that if they lived through some major flood or disaster or epidemic or whatever, that's going to be relevant. You know, there are also kind of timetable collections that will tell you what music was playing at the time, what were the hits, what plays, what fashions. I love looking up the fashions of the day and being able to kind of get a feel of what people were wearing, what the city looked like, whether there had been a fire, whether there'd been, you can go back and find places like the plats in the city of where somebody lived and see, you know, what that looked like. And there's census information, and there's information on military records in the military database. So yeah, there's a ton out there.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, Amanda, you began your piece this last time with Phases of the Moon.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, I know, isn't that cool? And wondering what the moon looked like in that night. You can find that out. That's that's impossible to find out. Almost everything is online now. So yeah, very, very cool. And then I think we have, I know that people need to get going. So Mary, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, it was basically just whether you kind of compile the quotes and stuff from interviews and that content and then build a narrative around that, or if you kind of establish the written narrative first and then go back and add in those quotations, or is it kind of like a combination of both?
It's a combination. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll have stuff and I start to feed it into Scrivener, which lets you move things around really easily. So I can just sort of start changing the order of things. But the old-fashioned way is I just kind of slug it out to the side. I'll write, okay, this is about the historic background. This part is about the actual event. This is emotional reaction. This is what, you know, I'll just kind of slug it and start arranging and getting kind of a flow of how the piece is supposed to go. And then as I write it, I mean, the quotes and the material to me are interconnected. You know, I don't ever plug in the quotes later and do the other first. I just do it all at the same time because they're all just words to me. You know, I don't separate them out. I know some people do, but I can't do that. It doesn't feel right.
Perfect. Well, anybody wants to chime in, but thank you so much. This has been so
helpful. Thank you. It was fun.
It was really, really great to listen to somebody who's made a career out of writing. I know so many of my students, you know, are thinking about moving in that direction, and you're such an inspiration and a role model. Thank you so much.
Well, it was all accidental, no strategy. So I don't have any good advice on that.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining the meeting. And
you guys had great questions.
Yeah, this is a great class.
I've got one more. What do you mean it was accidental? Just out of curiosity, like, what do you mean by that?
Oh, that I never had a rational plan for anything. You know, the good jobs I got were all by fluke, you know, and I didn't go to journalism school, and I majored in philosophy, and I only went to work for St. Louis Magazine the first time, an earlier version of it, because I was scared I was going to be single and wind up at St. Louis the rest of my life. And then I only went to grad school because I was bored with the corporate world and doing PR. And then I happened to meet my husband, and then I got a job at the RFT only because I was freelancing because I was broke on a stipend. And so it's like none of it really is the way you were supposed to do it.
It's the best kind of life.
Yeah. It's the only one I know how to live.
The only one I know too. Like,
when I would try, it would never work, you know?
I know. Like, that's why it's so hard when students come to me and ask, well, you know, should I, you know, what kind of major? Because I'm really worried about a job. And I'm like, I was the philosophy and religion major and an English major. I mean, I was no plan, just did what I loved, and it kind of worked out. Yeah.
I think it works better.
I do too. I mean, it's scary though, because I think things have changed, Jeannette, with like the cost of colleges and universities now, like telling.
And that's terrifying. But the thing is, it's now also, there's no guarantee for anything. Yeah, so trying to be practical and have a very definite job plan and security, you know, that
doesn't work out either.
That's no safer.
Yeah, it really
You might as well have fun and do what you love.
Amen. All right.
Yeah.
Perfect note to leave, because that was, there you go. I don't think it can get any wiser than that. Thank you so much. I really, really.
Oh, thank you. You guys were fun.
Once the social.
I hope I can read all your stuff. Maybe it'll wind up somewhere published.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, these are great writers. All right, thank you, everybody.
No problem.
Bye.
Yeah, take care. Stay safe, everyone.
Yes.
You too. Bye.
Bye.